Hello everyone and welcome back to the British Boxing Blog podcast, coming to you on Sunday, the day after Joshua Pulev. So we'll jump right in. We'll start from the top. And just before I ask you, Andrew, what your thoughts were, I just wanted to say that for me, I'll reiterate what I said on Twitter last night, that was probably the most I've enjoyed a Joshua fight in a good few fights, probably a couple of years maybe. And you know what? I think he enjoyed it too. I think he dealt with Pulev admirably. Really, I think he cruised it. Pulev had brief moments of joy, but to me, I thought I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that come forward, Joshua. Like I said on the previous show the other day, that I think he had to win the fight and win it well, and I think that's exactly what he did last night. By getting him out of there, probably took a bit longer than even he was expecting. I think once he had him going in the early rounds, I thought, maybe he was going to stop him, like I said, in the first six. Alas, it wasn't to be, and it took him a bit longer than that. It was the ninth. But again, job well done. Yes, there's flaws there, and, you can pick holes in it as you can with pretty much every heavyweight out there at the minute. Maybe apart from one, but I guess you could for him if you want to. So, again, for me, it was a solid night at the office for AJ, and yeah, no complaints, no issues, and like I say, I did enjoy it. I very much enjoyed it. Yourself, how did you think?
Wrap it up. Job done.
I thought just honestly, it's so easy, isn't it? As you know, to be negative about AJ and Matchroom and all that. And last night, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching him. I've got no complaints with any of it. It wasn't perfect, but there is whether you like it or not, there's a buzz when he fights. He is still a big deal, a very, very big deal in boxing in this country. Whether he's your cup of tea as a man or as a fighter or not, and I enjoyed it.
I think, to be honest, it's another one of those occasions where we actually agree. Yeah, honestly, I was going to open it with he's mint. It was just it was a good, entertaining fight. It was a good night of boxing, and say good night of boxing. We'll get to the undercard, I'm sure. In terms of it being a Joshua fight, and if you think of the mega stars and the big names, their undercards aren't necessarily always stacked with big fighters and stuff. You look at them and the big American cards and that, have had Mayweather, Pacquiao, and these mega events, which they're sort of trying to create for Joshua, regardless of opponent. Yeah. The undercards aren't always stacked, and it's about that main event. And we obviously talked about it in the preview show with regards to how excited or underwhelmed we were with it, and the fact he's a mandatory opponent, and stylistically, I think he was well suited to Joshua. But that said, there's not a lot more Joshua could have done than what he did. Obviously, he had him in a world of bother in the third, and that was a bit of a throwback to why there was so much hype behind Joshua and why so many people were engaged with this charismatic heavyweight who can steamroller anyone and flatten him in the third. And he did ease off a little bit. He boxed behind the jab and he sort of looked to move a bit more. And Pulev, despite being flattered all over the ring in the third, he turned his back, he was rolling on the floor. Fell over on the floor. It was just it could have easily been waved off at that point. Pulev was spun round to the point where he had his back to the action. Joshua was following up, trying to hit him in the back of the head wherever he could. And it was nice to see that bit of spite and that bit of nastiness in the Joshua performance, because we and lots of other people in the build-up were questioning whether we were going to see that from him or we'd see the total caution that he showed in the Ruiz rematch. I think there were elements of that, and he showed he can box and he can do that side of things if he needs to. But like you said, he almost enjoyed punishing him in there, and when he got him again later on in the fight, obviously it took to the ninth to break him down because of how patient he was probing, and the shot that finished it was stunning, lovely little 1-2, full extension on the jab and the right hand, and again, brilliant performance. I think what you expect, or what we expected, but he had to deliver, and he did. He definitely delivered on that occasion.
I think, like you say there, that there was elements of both. There was elements of the early AJ, the steamrolling AJ, and there was elements of Ruiz too. Like, he can box. Maybe he can't box as well as Fury, but when AJ lets that jab go and stays behind it, he's good. Like, he can box. He's not a stiff idiot. Like, all right, he's not as fluent as the comparisons will always come back to Fury, I guess. But maybe he's not as fluent as him. But the lad can box, and it's funny because it's not really something I picked up on last night, but there's a lot of agendas out there depending on who your favourite heavyweight is out of the two. Like, I've seen a couple of people then since saying, oh, AJ unloaded in the third, gassed himself out for a bit, and then it took him a good 4 rounds to get going again. And I think that's harsh for me. I don't think there's any... maybe he did conserve his gas tank, but what's wrong with that? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be full throttle 100 mile an hour every round of the fight. You know what I mean? And if he knew that, Christ, I put a lot into those punches, I'll just sort of, I'll go back behind me jab a bit and ease off. He was well in control of it. He was cruising it. Pulev had a few moments where he managed to get on the inside and, have a bit joy land on Joshua. But that was it. It was fleeting moments for me. He was well in control, AJ. There was no doubt in my mind it was ever going to be like Ruiz won and he was going to be wobbled or anything like that. He pretty much breezed it, like we said to each other last night. So I think criticism of that's harsh. People say, yeah, he had him in bother in the third and then sort of took a few, gassed for a bit, and a little harsh for me for that. I don't see that there's any issue with that.
I think he did. I think there's an element of truth to that. I think he put a lot into the third, and
yeah, he did.
It was the third round in the first Ruiz fight where Joshua dropped him. I didn't bother. I think, he's this amazing finisher. I think Eddie Hearn said in the build up of this one, like, if he gets you hurt, and like that's it, that's the fight over. And again, I feel we suffer occasionally for our lack of hyperbole and over the top exaggerations on things, and it's not true. Like, Joshua's had people hurt. Like Pulev last night had him hurt in the third and didn't get him out of there. He could easily have. It could have been waved off, but once he'd unloaded that, he did need a couple of rounds to get himself back into the build up his gas tank, get that second wind where he could put his shots together or put enough shots together to get him out of there. But like you said, if he can do that and win rounds whilst conserving his energy and rebuilding his energy, refilling his stamina, however you want to frame it. If he can do that while winning rounds against what we said is a durable top 10 heavyweight, then there's not a massive issue with that. I think if you're going to ultimately pick holes in it, and you've said yourself there, like, anyone you can do that with any boxer. Like, you can look and say, oh yeah, if he's in against someone who can press him and push him and make him fight at a high tempo for 12 rounds, then he's going to be in bother. But outside of Usyk, potentially Joe Joyce, stylistically, not maybe that same level, but who is there at a heavyweight that can fight for 12 rounds at a high pace? There's not many, and include even Fury in that. He's in his best performances, he's never set that high pace from start to finish. The Wilder rematch, he was more aggressive and more come forward and ultimately had things his own way and worked, deservedly did that. He had things his own way because of what he did. But if he hadn't have got him out when he did, would he have been able to press that for 12 rounds? You don't know. The question marks are always going to be there, but he answered them enough to suggest, he's preferred back. He showed that he can put his foot on the gas a little bit more, and he's not just going to be scared, as some people alluded to and hinted at. He's not scared of getting hurt. He took a couple of right hands off Pulev and had the confidence in his own chin, his own ability to take the shots and to ride the shots and to fire more back. And it was a good little blend, as I say. You said there, a bit of a mix. He showed he could box long, keep the range, control the tempo, and when the opportunity was there, put your foot on the gas and ultimately get him out of there without really losing a round. Maybe I wasn't scoring it, but really give more than 1-2 rounds to Pulev tops. It was as dominant a performance as you're likely to see. And you hit the nail on the head saying, there's maybe only Fury that's better than him. At very worst, Joshua is the second best heavyweight in the world. At the very worst.
Yeah. And he is as well.
It's not criticism, really. It's not hating on him to think Fury's slightly better or Fury would win if they fought. as I say, like my lack of interest in Joshua fights has been because I rank him and rate him so highly, and it's the same with Fury. Like I see those two now as the top ones in the division. Wilder was there up there when he had the WBC belt, which is why I wanted to see Wilder fight Joshua. Like you want to see the best fight the best. When Fury was out of the picture, it was Wilder Joshua. They were the two you wanted to see, and Joshua's beating Povetkin, he's defending against Ruiz in America. I had no interest in those fights because it wasn't competitive, and obviously in hindsight, the first Ruiz fight was, but on paper, they weren't fights where I expected AJ to be challenged or to be pushed or to be troubled, and it was ultimately the same last night. But in terms of his performance and from a boxing point of view, can't help but be impressed.
No, like you say, he is like he's elite. He really is, and like the same as me, you've watched a lot of heavyweight boxing recently, like Dubois, Joyce, and even last night, Bakoli Kuzman on the undercard. He is miles above that. Like that gap is big. That gap between Fury, Joshua, and go on, and we'll throw Wilder in there, I guess. That the gap between the big three and the rest now is pretty alarming. He is elite, like at this point. Just going back to the gas tank thing, if he was losing 4, 5, 6, and 7 last night and looked didn't bother, then fair enough, I could get the criticism. But like you say, he did adjust, and then he ultimately did get him out of there. So, maybe it's against a better fighter. He could have been made to suffer during those rounds where he sort of lowered the tempo a bit, but he wasn't last night. And like I wasn't scoring either. I was chatting through. I was watching.
But who are those better fighters that are going to do that? That's the point. Like,
well, exactly.
There's a lot of fighters who are probably in and around Pulev's level. Like Usyk is the name that stands out for me. I think technically superb. The Chisora fight maybe highlighted a few of his limitations at heavyweight, and I initially would have picked Usyk to beat Joshua. I felt like stylistically he could push him and pressure him, and if he can force him on the back foot and wear him down over 12 rounds, then that could be a difficult night for Joshua. But based on their last 2 fights, I think Joshua thought he could maybe have too much size, strength, power, but also he could box a bit as well, and maybe keep Usyk on the end of that jab. Like Usyk could be more capable of slipping it, dipping it, working his way in. Whether he's then got the power and the strength to win the battle on the inside, I don't know. It's an intriguing fight.
That is,
And your pal Tom Craze tweeted something about it, saying like it's one of the most intriguing fights that could be made. It's also one of the fights that no one wants to see. Just one Fury Joshua.
That's it. They do, and I touched on it on our preview show last week that Fury Wilder 2 is still the benchmark, like at heavyweight. That is the performance that everyone else will try and sort of adhere to and try and match. That was the best that I've seen in many years. And it wasn't just against a nobody. It was against, as you say, the number 2 and number 3 heavyweight in the world, and that was the thing is with Joshua now, he's in that position where everything he does until they fight will be compared to that. It was that good. It was unbelievable. So, and I guess that's where the holes, people picking holes and flaws, and straight after the fight last night, and it's going to rumble on, and whether we like it or not, and it dominates your timeline for good. All this week, it'll probably rumble on again. What would happen
last night, honestly?
Will it happen? I know, and that's it. And the Usyk one is, again, without going into politics, it is an intriguing fight, and it's probably a likely fight as well. I guess we're going to have to come to the subject, so we might as well do it now. My gut opinion on this Sunday, the day after AJ Pulev, despite the words from all parties, Fury, Hearn, whatever, I don't think it happens next.
It's agreed in principle. It's agreed in principle.
Fury will fight a warm-up fight, a bin man. He's got that habit of it. There's no way Fury, and I'm not putting this all to Fury, but there's no way Fury will go straight into AJ from Wilder 2 without fighting 1 or 2, at least one, someone along the lines of like Caballero that he got linked with, or like another Schwartz type fighter, or Otto Wallin or something like that. I don't think he will go into that cold at all. I think he is the type of fighter that probably prefers a little tune-up. He's done it before in his career. And when Usyk's still there, where Usyk's close ties with Matchroom and Hearn, etc., and I just think that's probably the easier fight to make. Do I hope it happens in 2021? Yes, man, massively. Like, but am I cynical and boxing politics and networks and from all that? Do I think it'll happen? The noises are positive. Let's hope so, because it's the fight we all need. Like, and you know what? If it doesn't happen, then it's a disgrace. On their heads be it. And I've included Fury, Joshua, Matchroom, BT, Top Rank, BT Sport. I've said that before. Sky Sports.
Adam Sky, you're pro Sky. You can blame BT.
Adam Smith, Frank Warren, Eddie Hurt. It's MTK. It's on everyone's head. They've got a responsibility, all of them, to deliver that fight. Like, just get it done. None of this A and B's and purses and all that. Just do it. Like, make it happen somehow, and deal with it, because it's such a boxing miscarriage. And if that doesn't happen, it's a travesty. It really is, because it's massive. It's mega.
You pay 50 quid to watch it.
Why paid 26 last night, didn't I?
Why did you pay the extra quid?
Yeah, going back to that discussion we had on Thursday, I honestly got to the point last night where I couldn't be fussed trying to fix my IPTV or download a VPN or watch it on the internet. And I've seen a lot of people complain last night on social media. Apparently Virgin Media's stream wasn't great. I had no issue.
Did you see the pictures of it?
No, I haven't.
It was lower quality than our podcast. I'm telling you. It was
That's shocking. I shouldn't laugh, really.
Someone said it was like watching on a Mega Drive.
It's a disgrace, that, I shouldn't laugh.
Like, when like we have now TV for the Sky Sports, and sometimes it does freeze or sort of goes all like neon colours and that, like for a split second, and then sorts itself out. But apparently it was all like that. It was like different coloured blocks around the screen, which, to be honest, was probably more of a blessing during the undercard. But then loads of people had rang the number and there was no one there. There was just an automated thing saying like to get in touch by email, and then people were screenshotting their email saying that there was a thing on Virgin's website saying they were aware of a problem, engineers were on it, and it would be rectified by 11:20 on Saturday night.
Shocking, it's like we said the other week, going back, like totally irrelevant to boxing, but that Amazon stream the other week for Crystal Palace Newcastle, like they had one job, massive company. They had one job, massive worldwide, huge company, and they can't even sort of really stream out on Amazon Prime. It is frustrating. I shouldn't laugh. It's for people that we go into the cost element, and that's one job, and that's to get a good stream going from Virgin Media for the fight.
And this is the problem, because like with something like that, is again, as paying customers, these aren't, we're not going to go into the whole rant of pay-per-view again, but these potentially, or a lot of the customers aren't the type of fans who will watch boxing regularly. That'll be their last experience of boxing for several months. And it comes again, you think, well, actually, do I want to bother? Like, the amount of people on Twitter and that, like, as you say, laughing essentially because they hadn't paid for it, and their illegal streams were better than what's getting put up there as an official outlet. It was, you say one job, and it obviously didn't do it successfully, shall we say.
Just going back to what I was talking about before we got sidetracked, to Fury Joshua, and I know you'll talk here. This will be a long answer, so I'll ask you now and I'll sit back. Do you think it'll happen next? Do you think it'll happen in 2021, or do you think it'll happen next? What do you think?
Yeah, it happens next.
Shut up, man.
That's my short answer. No, unfortunately not. I think you mentioned Fury and how long he's been out of the ring. Like, it was sort of January this year, was it, when he beat Wilder? And obviously the Wilder rematch, like the third one, was sent to be on the cards. That, for whatever reason, fell by the wayside. I think, bit British bias aside, you've got to point the finger at Wilder there. There was apparently a deadline that had to be made, and then as soon as that deadline had passed, Wilder then started coming out making noises in public. Whether Team Fury, Top Rank, MTK, whoever's involved in those negotiations, have deliberately made things difficult for Wilder, I honestly don't know. And there's a whole other trail here we could go down about what exactly is in a rematch clause, what details are finalised, and what's still open to interpretation or negotiation, because we could write a contract and say, right, there has to be a rematch if Fury wins, but that doesn't then take into account purse splits for the rematch, doesn't take into account venue, doesn't take into account broadcasters, all these boring bollocksy bits of boxing that no one really cares about. They just talk about and chat on about to try and show that they know a bit more about the sport. And I think there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. I do think it's boring at times, but we've been guilty of it in the past. Like, we hear whispers, and almost when you want to defend a certain fighter, then you're thinking about, oh, well, why should they get in the ring and fight this guy? That's a big risk. They should be getting paid more for that. And it's like almost sympathising with the fighter in that sense. It's an extra way of showing you support for a certain fighter. And to be totally honest, I don't know if we're going to talk about predictions if it does happen or whatever, but normally we don't bother with the hypothetical matchups. But regardless of who you think is going to win or who you prefer, like, there is a duty to boxing to get this fight made. We've seen it in the past, and I think with Declan Taylor, who tweeted something out about similar to you, saying that, you know, it's not necessarily going to happen, and he was like, well, actually, if it doesn't happen, that's going to favour Joshua more, like the longer it goes on, and if Fury is out of the ring for longer or whatever. And I was like, well, we had this with Wilder Joshua, like, told that it was going to get made. They were talking about it. It was the biggest fight in the world. Like, two undefeated heavyweight champions unifying. Like, we'll do one in England, one in America. It's the biggest event in the world. There's hundreds of millions of pounds to be made. And then loses to Ruiz, and it's all up in smoke. And then since obviously Fury beat Wilder, so then like that fight was potentially huge. We could have seen that. Then we could have seen the winner in against Fury. And now it's sort of the orders swapped around a little bit, and it's completely evaporated. I think Fury beating Wilder, like, that first fight wasn't necessarily deemed as competitive. It was almost seen as a cherry pick for Wilder, taking Fury after his long layoff, and Wilder was going to destroy him, and then would get the Joshua fight on. And boxing has this knack of plans, essentially. Like, the longer you leave something to marinate, eventually it'll go off.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think at this point with Wilder, I think the responsibility is even bigger now to make Joshua Fury, because Wilder's out of the picture and we don't know what's going on with him. You've heard all of his patter from the last few weeks and months, and, or, you know, sort of seems from the outside looking in, he's sort of losing the plot a bit. You don't know where he is mentally. Will he even be back at all? Will we ever see him again?
And this is sorry to interrupt there, but this is where, like, Fury was, and then Fury sort of got himself back into that picture. And as you said, you've got Fury, you've got Joshua. They're two both British heavyweights as well, which obviously magnifies it at this end of the pond. It's definitely the biggest fight in Britain to be made, but like in the world, like, it is huge. And again, I might get accused of a bit of Fury bias here, but I don't think it'll be the end of the world if Fury were to fight a tune-up, if he gets that done in January or February, because Joshua is not going to be fighting Fury in January or February anyway. Probably not even March. Like, you're looking around April, May. Well, maybe even heading into the summer, and then the two of them will have roughly had about the same time off. Like, if that happens, yes, there's the risk you could get hurt again and could get injured and it falls through. But I wouldn't be as adverse to, like, if you want to do that and get it out of the way, and then negotiations begin, and even if we get Fury Joshua middle of the year, end of next year, then, like, so be it. Obviously, the Joshua fans will be thinking, oh, that's like double standards, and it is to a certain extent. But, like, if then Joshua wanted to do the same, like, one holding fight in between, like, the most you could sort of tolerate, if there was a sort of guarantee or a promise that, right, like, it's part of the negotiation, we're both allowed one tune-up fight, and then this happens, whatever happens from there. Like, there's a risk in that, but if that's what it takes to get it made, then it's a small sacrifice in the grand scheme of things.
I totally agree. And I think it doesn't necessarily, like you just said, for me, have to be next. It just has to be 2021. God, if you're going to do it, and I personally, my personal opinion is that it won't be in the UK. If it's going to be in the UK, you're looking at a stadium, you're looking at Wembley. You know, that's. I've just confused my own argument there because I've just thought of the Euros. You know what I mean? So, you know, you're looking at, forget the football, like, but you're looking at May, June, July, August stadium weather in the UK, outdoor stadium weather. So
good shout about the Euros though, because that'll be
do you know what I
another
mean?
thing that pops up in terms of the negotiations about how it can't be done.
Personally, I think it won't be in the UK. I still think the Middle East is the main play for that. Personally, I think that, like, without going into like Daniel Kinahan and all that involvement, I do think the Saudi money will come into that market. But if it does take one more fight each, and it happens next summer or next whatever, later next year, then fair dues. But I don't think it's going to, let's be honest, it's not going to be February, March for me. Like, it's, that's
No,
aging.
it's not, and that's what I mean. Like,
you have to be realistic. You have to be realistic there. Yeah.
Even if it happens next, it's still not going to be
June,
is it? It's still going to be, as you say, May at the earliest, probably.
I totally agree. Sorry, it just has to happen. Like you said, there's that give or take realism that, as boxing cynics and people that have been around this sport for a good few years, you have to have that little bit of realism that there's a lot to go into it and a lot to go into the negotiations. It probably won't be next. We did a poll last night on Twitter, and I asked will Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fight each other next. For the sample size, it was 265 votes, which for us isn't bad. No was 59% and yes was 41%, which is, I guess, the side of the fence that, just to sum up what we've been saying, is where we both sit on, I think. Personally, I don't think it will happen next, but 2021, come on. Put your heads together and sort it out and just do it. As you said, Andrew, boxing has a massive, massive habit of shooting itself in the foot and leaving things too late or not at all. And just don't look back in a few years, and everyone that I mentioned before, like all the relevant parties, don't look back and with any regrets and think, God, we should have done that. Do you know what I mean? And just do it. Just make it next year. It has to happen now. But anyway, that's enough on that. I know we don't always like to talk about hypothetical fights, but I think it would have been remiss of us not to touch on that today. Like, you know what I mean, after last night. Do you want to work our way down the undercard? Should I start? We'll do a sort of bit of a fight each down the AJ undercard last night. I'll go from the top.
Yeah, go for it. And I know I noticed you've jumped straight in getting the next one there, because then what comes after that?
No, I was going to start with the Coley, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
There was a bit of entertainment in that one, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. There was. And again, you know what? It's sort of similar to AJ, where I think for viewers wise, Coley had to win and had to win well, because let's not beat around the bush here. He's had some absolute stinkers on Sky. Do you know what I mean? He's not always everyone's cup of tea boxing wise. Again, that slight sort of asterisk next to it, that it wasn't his intended fight. It wasn't Glovati for the world champion. It was a late sort of stand-in who was pretty hopeless, let's be honest. Coley's now
using the word standing loosely there. He's barely standing.
Shaky legs. Coley's now with Shane McGuigan. It looked last night to me that he was just getting the frustration out of there from a COVID pullout and his world title slot being chance being delayed, and he was ruthless, and he just battered an opponent who was levels below him. Again, he probably needed that viewing wise, public wise, to show that I'm not just a holder or a smotherer. Like, I can bang still and I can get him out of there, despite the levels. That was a play that I thought was so obvious last night at Coley by stoppage. I didn't think it'd be that early, but just shy of 3-1, I think it was on. But yeah, no issues with that from Coley.
Yeah, I avoided tipping that one because I think it's sometimes tricky with the late swap of opponent, like the A side, for hating using that term, but like they say to Coley, sometimes the motivation's not quite there, and based on what he's done in the past, you could see him almost labouring to a points decision, be very awkward and a lot of holding, a lot of struggling, pushing, shoving, getting tied up on the inside. But yeah, from what you said, like, he boxed really, really well. He controlled the range a bit more than he had potentially done in the past. I mean, we saw him, was it the Copper Box where he beat Wadi Camacho and looked sensational there. Like, he's got very good power for cruiserweight and very heavy-handed when he gets from a technical point of view. And he gets that extension on, he punches, and he's got a good long reach. So he can use the jab, he can land the right hand from good distance and generate a lot of power with that. So like, obviously against a limited opponent, he did that, but there were visually some hinted technical improvements in Okoli.
He's with a trainer that we both rate very highly now, and that's Shane McGuigan. So hopefully that does bring about those improvements, and he can, continue to be aggressive because, like you say, he has got the power. Eddie Hearn was particularly bullish in his post-fight interview last night, and he was like, he was basically saying that the 3-fight plan, and he wants to sort of get that rematch with Glavation and end with Bradis. Now, for the life of us, can't remember who the second person in that was, and he was like, basically 1, 2, 3. Then we move up to heavyweight. He was like, this kid's a star. He's a massive puncher. He's going to be a future world champion and all that pattern. It was quite a big bullish statement interview. And, Okoli, as I said earlier, he's not everyone's cup of tea. But when you look back at them sort of 2016 Olympians now, he's the one that's moved the quickest out of the male fighters. And he's moved faster than Buatsi, faster than Fowler and all that lot, Cordino and all them. Like, he's the one that's knocking on that world title door first, and hats off to him. He hasn't messed about. He really hasn't. He's done it the sort of traditional way. He's won the belts, but he hasn't hung around at the levels. It's bang, bang, bang. And last night should have been a sort of crowning moment, or at least a challenge for a world title. Wasn't to be, but I'm sure it'll come again soon. So just to sum him up, routine night in the office against an opponent who wasn't very good, basically. We'll move down. I'll ask you about a fighter that you've paid a bit of attention to over the years, and that's Martin Bakole. You called it on the preview show that you really fancied him to beat Kuzmin. He did, but my thoughts was it maybe wasn't that breakout performance that everyone was hoping for him last night. It was a win and a fight he did win well in the end, but just again, he's just in that bracket of contenders, isn't he? Beneath the big block.
And I think, like, I was sitting thinking this morning before the podcast of potentially doing 5 things we've learned about AJ or something as like a little YouTube clip or like a separate YouTube video, and might still knock that together. But if you were to do that about Bakole, I would struggle to list 5 things that I've learned about him from that performance, other than talk about the level that I believe he's at. Like we said, again, on paper, that this was fairly evenly matched in that Kuzmin and Bakole both lost to Michael Hunter. The only loss on their records. The rest of their wins at a similar sort of level of fringe heavyweight opponents. Some decent names on there, some not. And Bakole looked very, very relaxed in there. I think early on, the two of them looked to be sort of trading heavy leather, putting a bit more into the shots. And whether it's physically, the gas tank we've talked about with heavyweight is not generally the best at any level. Like maybe they needed a few rounds off and stand trade and letting the punches go for a bit, and then maybe taking a round to recover. And it seemed both men were doing that, and both were content to maybe leave a bit of gas in the tank and not necessarily press and push the action. I think without having scored it, it's tough for me to say that like Bakole was a worthy winner. I know on the DAZN coverage, Gareth A. Davis mentioned to the commentators that he had Kuzmin up at one point, and they were like shocked. They'd basically given every round to Bakole. It wasn't the most action-packed fight throughout. Bakole controlled it. Most of the fight used his jab, which was nice and loose, sometimes from the hip, going to targeting body and head, and followed up occasionally with the right hand and mixing it up a little bit. Wasn't the most exciting of fights. And coming back to the word hype and promotional push and all these other things we talk about with boxing, this card, despite the fact that a lot of people weren't very praising of it in terms of the undercard and the fight, it's still a chance where you're fighting on an AJ undercard to go out and make a statement like you talked about Bakole doing. There's a little stress next to just how big a statement that was given the opponent. But Bakole, if he'd gone out and smashed Kuzmin to bits, or even like completely schooled him and beat him up over the 10 rounds, you might have been sitting there thinking, oh yeah, actually, you know what I mean? Like he is going to gone into that world level. He's going to, you think he's always in the top 15, and we got a lot of What you stripping us for?
I love because turn around. Is that the moon behind you?
Yeah. Oh no, it's a reflection of the light on the window.
Because your head blocks it out lovely, but then you ended outside at the
Yeah, leaning a bit.
I noticed it the other night and I thought it was the moon, but that's
we haven't got a lampshade on that light.
Right.
There you go. A little peek behind the curtain of BBB there.
I know I said we were going to do a fight each, but I might as well chip in on the Coley as well. And
yeah, I dived in on a Coley, so go for it.
But no, I just thought it was it was the first time I'd massively really watched them since Hunter properly. And at times I really liked what I've seen, but there was times where you mentioned the word laid back before, or the words laid back, and I thought, Christ, that's saying something. Like, that man is chilled. That man
is to be nice.
He's chilled. He there is times, and that he just sort of plants them feet and stands still basically, and you hear Billy Nelson in the corner shouting "Move, Martin!" and he's
something.
He can just stay standing pretty stationary for quite a long time, which at heavyweight is probably not the best idea. But like you said, if he'd have scored that stoppage and really knocked Kuzmin out, which at one point I thought he had him going a bit, but you mentioned the trade in leather, but it looked like from where I was watching, proper heavy shots, but neither of them seemed massively deterred by each other's shots. It was a good win for him, but it's a win that still... It was a performance and a win that still leaves us with questions on him. I still don't know how good he is or who a realistic opponent is from next. Is it back in with Hunter to try and avenge that?
I know they've talked about that. And again,
does anyone want Hunter though? Does anyone want to fight Michael Hunter?
Well, apparently so. I mean, if anyone would, you'd think McCauley would want to avenge that loss.
Bit of a bogeyman, isn't he?
A bit of flack in the immediate aftermath of that, the nature of it, and sending McCauley back out even though he's injured. And I think potentially though, obviously Billy Nelson knows him as well as anyone, and he said in the build-up that we haven't really seen his full potential. Only he sort of has, and obviously trainer hyped up boxer is hardly a shocking headline. But saying that he's around 75% of what McCauley's capable of, and I don't think, based on his body language last night, that we really saw much above that. Maybe we've seen now 80% of what he's capable of, going on that logic. When I say laid back, in the ring, during the action, but also in the corners, Billy Nelson was sort of animated and giving him good tactical advice about mixing up the jab, targeting the body and all the rest of it. But McCauley just sort of sat there and he's almost, I'm not saying he was, but he almost looks like he's not bothered. He just shrugged it off type thing, and very, very, very relaxed, very calm in his demeanour. And I think that potentially could be misconstrued as some, against a better opponent, as you say. He's not necessarily doing enough to win the rounds. Can he then either be motivated or motivate himself to do a bit more and to produce a bit more?
Just to repeat again, I'm going to repeat it again. I'm going to repeat it on every show until it happens, that there's so many heavyweight contenders in that same caliber, in that same tier. If World Boxing Super Series continues, God, just do it with all that lot, because it's fascinating. There's so many similar heavyweights now. Matchroom could do their own. They've got that many signed to them and that many fighting with them.
You can get MTK next closing contract.
Honestly, it might take a bit. It's really interesting. And again, he's another one in that bracket. And speaking of heavyweights in that bracket, that contender bracket, and that leads us seamlessly on to Hughie Fury. I'll take the lead with this one because I wanted to speak about this one. I was impressed. I really was. And I mentioned on the preview show the other night, I was like, I don't think a leopard can change his spot. And what do I know? Hughie Fury comes out and he's firing right hands, left, right, and centre. He came out first sort of 5 rounds and he was proper thrown, which isn't what we necessarily associate with him. And I enjoyed the new aggressive side to him. What impact it made on Marius back, an absolute lump of a man. I don't know. Hughie took some as well, and again, it's not a typical Fury, Peter Fury, Hughie Fury sort of attribute. Really, he doesn't like his fighters taking them. That's not what he does. But for whatever reason, Hughie came out sort of thrown last night. Whether that's in response to sort of public criticism or something that it was deliberate, I don't know. And then he got that cut to the eye, which looked really bad from initially. And I know a lot of people on Twitter have been bigging up Kerry Case, his cut man. And I know Peter Fury did last night, saying he did an absolute wonderful job with that, and he really did. And then after that, it was sort of a reversion to tactics, and it was old Fury and old Huey, and I thought he went back to his boxing, he sort of switched stances, back foot stuff, stylish stuff, what we've seen from over the years, what we've seen from Tyson as well. And he showed a maturity there to see out the fight against, an opponent who has been dangerous in the past, but whose best days are probably now behind him. But still, he saw it out, the cut. He didn't let the cut get to him. It was a fight of two halves, really, the aggressive first half, and then, right, I'm just going to sort of shut up shop here and see this out with. And yeah, I thought it was a really spot on, good night's work for him. Again, in that bracket, he's just in that top 15, 20 heavyweight bracket of where do I go? And they were talking last night of, they're not going to immediately sort of rush him this time. And younger Huey was thrown in there, against Parker and Povetkin, away to Bulgaria, Pulev. He's fought a lot of big names, and I think maybe he'll just flirt around this sort of level now for a bit. And he's still only 26, and he's still got time on his side. And yeah, I thought it was a good night's work for Huey.
Yeah, linking back to Okoli in the sense of how rapid his progress has been. They say that when you get to that world level, like, unless you lose, you can't necessarily drop back down. Like, you get a world title, you're at world level, you've got to defend, and we know there are limited, like, loads of title defenses that happen. But you've got that target on your back, and there's a bit of pressure, there's a bit of criticism, bit of scrutiny on you that isn't there at other levels. So it might be that those losses are a blessing in disguise. It was almost like with the Parker fight that was really, really pushed ahead of his time. It was almost a bit unforeseen that Huey got the world title fight. And if he fought like he did last night, a bit more aggressively for a couple of those rounds, he could have been world champion. And then you don't know, do you? Like, who's he defending that title against? Obviously, Parker went on to fight Joshua. Like, imagine Huey got that very close decision.
That's mental, right?
Parker, and then fought Joshua. Like, that could potentially have been a world title unification. And I know lots of people thought Huey got that. Like, I don't even remember. I don't think I watched it since I watched it at the time. But like, it was a close fight. It could have gone either way. And it's bizarre to think that like where he's gone since. But if he's actually learned lessons from the Parker fight, again from the Povetkin loss, from the Pulev fight, going out to Bulgaria where he did suffer a nasty cut and almost went back into his shell a bit and didn't really do anything from that point on and let Pulev take the rounds. Whereas obviously last night, not saying it was the same level of opponent, but he had the cut and it didn't bother him in the slightest. So that could be that at 26 years old, he learned a lot of lessons that heavyweights don't always get the chance to learn and then bounce back.
I think that's a great point you mentioned. It's blown my mind a little bit, that. Thinking back with the benefit of hindsight of Huey Fury world champion. And Christ, not that there's a bad time to win a world title, but with what we know now, it's the point of like, that probably would have been a jump too soon for him. And was he really ready for that company? Like, is he still ready for that? I don't know. But like, it's mental that when you think about that. But I think it's probably been a blessing that he's lost that, and he's naturally went on the journey now to build up to a level where he's comfortable being at the age of 26, and that's his sort of platform to build off now. Wins against the likes of like Marius Vac.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not putting a lot of stock into beating back. Like, I imagined he would beat Wack. I imagined he would win on points. Didn't go exactly as I thought. He put that's a bit earlier, but ultimately it was that result because Peter Fury in the corner was saying like later on, I can't remember which round it was or in between which rounds, but he was like, he's not going anywhere. Like, get back to your boxing, move, and like he wants his fighters to do. And he did that, but even in the 12th towards the end, he was looking to throw some big hooks and looking to potentially get him out of there. But he's saying like he's a big lump, he's got a big head, like solid, like some of the journeymen we've seen, the European ones. And he also said like mix it up. He's got a big body there to hit as well. And like afterwards, he said he's a big hard lump. He was like, technically he's not the best, but he's going to stand there. He's going to make you work. He's going to put you under pressure. And if you let him, he can prove a very difficult night's work. And was it Was it the Joshua Reed undercard where Wack fought Dillian White?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
it was a very out of shape Dillian White, but he gave him more problems than he gave Huey Fury last night.
Yeah, that's right. No, he did.
I know if you don't take him seriously, he could potentially give you a bit of a rough time, but like, yeah, a good win. And it's similar to McCauley. So, like, again, you could say put them in together, see what happens with that.
Yeah,
There'll be boxing fans out there begging that not to happen. But
I'd like it.
In terms of like how closely they're matched, and you're looking at the Matchroom stable, they do have a lot of these fringe level of heavyweight. Like, did Huey Fury, like, I know Dave Allen's retired, that was sort of mooted. David Price still potentially kicking about there. Chisora, depending on what he wants to do. These would be good.
Yeah.
Tear down from world level or tear down from the elite world level fights that you could learn from and win.
Well, that's it. And there is like, and I'm repeating myself again here. There's so many fights out there now for all these lots. Like Matchroom alone, do you know what I mean? Like, you know, there's obviously the Michael Hunter's kicking about. You've got Chisora. You know, like Hrgovic. You know, there's absolutely loads. Like, but Gassiev, what's he? I don't know. And I guess sort of quick fire. We'll try and we sort of get to the early fights now on the. We're getting to the early fights on the undercard now. And a fight that I think I had a bit of intrigue in was Kevin Conway and Macaulay McGowan. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice I tipped the Kevin Conway stoppage last night, which, you know, I don't regret doing that. And a lot of what I said would sort of come true in that fight. But I guess that's what you get for tipping a man with 3 stoppage victories from 16 fights or whatever it is. Again, as I mentioned, I'll just try and do this one quickly. As I mentioned last week on the preview show, McGowan took a bit of a beating a month ago on the MTK show against the Kazakhstan lad whose name I've now forgot. Kubrat Pulev? I don't know. Anyway, the next he was only his second pro fight in one of the many Kazakh fighters that MTK have got high.
Progress rapidly, though, don't they? Like, if they've got a bit of talent, there's no hanging about with them.
And McGowan went into that last night, again, a month later, and there was eyebrows raised that I mentioned that, oh God, on the back of a beating. And to be honest with you, he got a bit of a beating last night. His game is to come, whether that's to his own good or his own detriment, who knows. But his corner obviously don't believe in pulling the man out or the towel or anything like that. They let him go to the bell, even though he wasn't. He landed a few shots on, but the size difference, Conway, back and shoulders. You know, again, I have to say that McGowan was a late replacement for Suleiman Sissoko, who again withdrew for, he said, administrative reasons. But yeah, it was one-way traffic throughout. Matthew Macklem is sort of imploring that, come on, Conway should really, really step on the gas here and try and get McGowan out of there. I think he did to an extent, but hard little lad, McGowan. But, you know, that's 2 pretty bad beatings he's got in the space of, you know, November and December now. The knockout wasn't to be, the stoppage wasn't to be. I took a punt on that at above even money. You know, the way my luck's going in a minute, it didn't come in. But, you know, my reasoning was there, and with a bit more spite, and I think that might be one of the things that holds Conway back. He's definitely in that domestic mix, like he's proved before, like his fight with like Cheeseman and that. How far he goes, I don't know. I would like to see just that bit more. Like you mentioned at every podcast we do, Andrew, that people like knockouts and, you know, power. And you look at his record now, I think it's 3 knockouts from, is it 16 or 18, something like that. And the ratio's not really there. And I think, again, it's hard to judge where he's at. He's definitely in that domestic mix. Whether he'll go any further than that with his lack of power remains to be seen.
I think he's impressed Matchroom in like the Cheeseman performance, which was scored a draw, and he's definitely since knocked up a couple of wins that deserve to put him in that mix. And you've got like the Cheeseman rematch there potentially. You've got the likes of Fowler, Fitzgerald. The other side of the coin, you've got like Metcalf, Troy Williamson, Harry Scarf knocking about there. There's some decent domestic level super welterweights. And what surprised me, you've mentioned, was just how big Conway was. Like Joshua Boatsy said this, he'd seen him in the gym and thought, he must be like a super middleweight because like the size of him. And like when he first saw him, and then obviously he's like, I don't know how he boils down to that weight.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as he's happy doing it and able and healthy to do it, then he can push and he can give those names I've just mentioned a hell of a tough time. But ultimately, if you haven't got that power, you might find yourself in a bit of bother in that you can't keep someone like a Fowler off you. But also, you're going to be in that position where you're relying on the judges, and we've talked about judging and God knows what else to do with scoring systems and how it works infinite amount of times. But
yeah,
it puts you at that disadvantage where, like, if you're in against someone like Fowler, he's going to be pretty confident that he's not getting stopped, and just adds a bit of intrigue, a bit of interest to the fight, I suppose. But it's almost putting you at a disadvantage. So his ceiling might be around that British level.
Well, the name that you mentioned there, the name that you did mention there, sorry, is a fight that was initially scheduled for this undercard, and that was Kieran Smith. I don't know if that was mandated maybe by British boxing, but I don't know. But again, Kieran Smith's a talented fighter in that division, but who was sadly found himself probably a bit similar to Michael Mackinson when we always talk about that division, the 147, that he's found himself in the sort of who needs him club. Do you know what I mean? He's good, but he doesn't have the backing of like a major promoter and stuff. So he's the one name in that division now that, especially with not too many shows being like, up in Scotland and stuff, like he's not really getting many fights. And that was a really fight that we initially had it on round for pound. But do you know what I mean? Or we'd scheduled it for round for pound. It was listed on BoxRec. It was done, but like it had definitely been scheduled, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And another good fighter in that division, who just hasn't had the breaks in recent years, but another name to add to that mix. Do you know what I mean? Like, such a pretty the top 10 of that division in this country. There, I'm just looking at BoxRec there. You go from like Stephen Donnelly in 10th, Troy Williamson, JJ Metcalf, Conway Smith, Hamza Shiraz, who was very good the other week. Okay, we'll sort of not include Scott Fitzgerald at this minute because I think he's having a few issues outside the ring, so he's a bit inactive. But then Egerton, Cheeseman, Fowler, there's some cracking fights to be made there, 2021 domestically, like so. But yeah, again, job well done. Never in doubt. That takes us down to everybody's favourite Albanian, Florian Marku, who...
Name another Albanian.
Oh, that striker I used to play. Oh, the striker from the 90s, 2000s. Eagly Traore, remember him?
I do, right.
Veteran centre forward.
Did he play in Italy?
Played Lazio.
No, I don't know, possibly. I definitely picture him in Serie A.
Sometimes I blur reality with who I used to sign a football manager.
Yeah, that was a hell of a diversion. I saw Florian Marku, TNT.
I gave him a big belt, didn't I? On Thursday, I gave him a big star, ticks all the boxes, this, and this. And lo and behold, fell a bit flat. I really did. And even if he won that fight, Andrew, which he probably did deserve to, even if he won, it still would have put the brakes on the hype train a little bit, I think, last night.
Yeah, I think, joking aside, like that, probably a bit harsh on Marku. It wasn't that explosive performance that we anticipated and thought it would be. Full credit to Jamie Stewart for that as well, because he did play his part. I think he boxed well. He took what Marku had to offer, say for a body shot that dropped him. That body shot went in. You thought, yeah, we go, like early stoppage. He rode that out, and I thought he won a couple of the rounds. I thought he did enough to get the rounds, but like I tweeted out something afterwards saying that the shock on the zone coverage, this halfway through, like I'm not even joking, about 3 or 4 rounds into the Conway fight, it was still like they hadn't called any of it. They were still just talking about how Marku had been robbed, and it was interesting. I think the shock, I said, was partially because of the fact it was a home fighter getting the raw end of the deal. Like if Marku had been given every round, which the zone coverage had basically done,
yeah,
that would have been, to me, just as bad a scorecard. Like I had a couple of rounds in it, obviously with the knockdowns and Marku winning convincingly, but to not give anything to Jamie Stewart was quite tough on him, I thought. So yes, ultimately Marku should have the win on his record. It should be, another one in the win column. He shouldn't have that draw on there. But where this might work in his favour is a lot of the fighters who potentially would have been avoiding him will fancy their chances.
Oh,
They'll think
on Twitter last
that
night.
he's drawn without even like watching the fight necessarily. I saw on Twitter, Darren Surtees called him out.
Did he?
Ellis Corey had posted something on Facebook about posted something about him on Facebook. There's been two Northeast lads who now seemingly fancy their chances.
Joe Laws was for a third.
What?
Joe Laws was making a go a bit on Twitter, and I messaged him, says, "Would you fancy a bit of Marco?" He's like, "Wait, I can't."
There you go. There's the Holy Trinity. Get him on an MCK Newcastle show up here. But
did Marco last night remind you a bit of early Joe Laws? Like, we watched a lot of Joe's early fights, where he didn't really jab and he came forward, and it was just like he's a bit raw.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna do a very quick technical breakdown, and who am I to do that? But anyway, from the kickboxing background that Marco hails, there is a tendency with some of them when they come into boxing to stand a little bit square on, because they're used to almost being like that in kickboxing, so they can push the leg kicks out and they can the stance essentially for that, as well as obviously letting the hands go. And what I noticed about him is what you notice about a lot of punchers, that they're almost getting seduced by their own power. Like, there wasn't a lot of variation in power on his shots. He looked like he was trying to sink every single shot in with as much power and as much force as possible. Obviously, that's worked so far because no one he's come up against essentially has been able to take that. Every power puncher at some point comes across someone that can take their power, whether it's just physically, they can stand up to it, whether it's through a bit of clever boxing and negating the power, like slipping the shots or blocking or parry, like not taking the full weight of the shots. And that's when, as someone with heavy hands, you've got to then be able to adapt. So maybe if he'd hacked a little bit with the jab, look for those openings and put a bit more power on where there was a gap, rather than putting a lot of the shots into the arms and just almost like determined that he was going to take him out with one shot. Had a bit of disguise, a bit more subtlety to some of his work, and that is critical. And obviously, if he's listening or whatever, any of his team are listening, I'll turn and say, like, "Who the fuck you could tell me that?" And it's like, I totally accept that, but that's just from what I've watched of it and what I know of it and what I've seen last night. There probably was an opportunity for him to do a little bit better, and yes, he's raging with the decision, and rightly so. But I think once they analyse the performance, they'll see that could have been a little better as well.
It definitely slows down that hype train, like I said, and even if he'd won it last night, it would have slowed that down as well. I think the true victor really from that fight was James Stewart. You know me, I'm an absolute sucker for a boxing feel-good story. What a week that lad's had. Just shows that power of social media to like put his name out there and be like, right, I'll come in the bubble, I'll fight him. Due to, I think it was Fearon that got called off. And just what a story he's got, man. He's like, I saw a snippet from a Seconds Out interview earlier in the week that he's been to prison, he's drug addiction, and he's just turned his life around in a week there of just making his little social media go, right, I'm from Stoke, I'm 2-0, I'll come in there, I'll do it. And he did, and it was class. And I just think what a mint feel-good sort of story for someone who came across so well. He was just, on that interview I've seen, he like sort of divulged a little bit about his past, saying like he was on this drug in Stoke, and it's such a localized drug that like he wouldn't have even heard of the name of it, and him and all his mates were like on it, and like some people have fell on really hard times since. He went to prison, but boxing's given that physical like and mental like turned his life around type of thing, and to come in there and to end up on an AJ undercard at like 4 days notice, and you see the way his corner celebrated the draw and that, and the way he celebrated it, and I just thought that was mint. So it was as good. It was like a win for him basically. So massive credit to him. Marku, I think I was a bit disappointed he didn't build on the knockdown. A lovely body shot, and never really built on that. Either looked like he was pretty struggling tempo-wise as well. Stewart set a pretty decent tempo, and it took Marku like quite a lot to get back into on the inside to get them shots off again. He couldn't really put anything massively sustained together after that, which I think, again, when they analyse it, it'll be a source of frustration. Aye, as it is, like you say. People will call him out now, and rightly so. Like, he's got that platform, he has to deliver. He's with SJam, he's now with Matchroom. Like, he's the man with the platform, and people want a part of that now, like Stuart did last night. They want to take that off him.
Yeah, and that's it. Like you mentioned there, the sort of the pacing of the fight. Like, again, if you're putting a lot of effort into your shots, it's going to have an effect if you don't get him out of there. And obviously, when he didn't, it took him that little bit of time later on in the second half of the fight to work his way back in and maybe build up that second wind a little bit. And while he was doing that, I thought Stuart was doing enough to edge some of those rounds. Ultimately, what we said on Thursday hasn't changed. He's still got the backing of SJam. He's still on the Matchroom show. He's got the Matchroom deal. So he is in one way where the pressure and the scrutiny is going to be worse than ever. He's still in very capable hands. He's still in the best possible position that he's got that going forward. They can maybe just take a little step back, get him in on on the undercard, somewhere down on the undercard, and give him that chance to sort of go away, do a bit of work, come back, refresh, rebuild. Like I said with the Coley earlier, when there is that late change of opponent, sometimes the motivation isn't quite there. I know there was a bit of chat back and forth between Marco and McGowan on Twitter. They ended up them meeting in the hotel and the bubble and all this. And it just seems to like exaggerate and build up that hype around Marco. So I think there would have been a lot of eyes on him who were potentially disappointed. And it'll be very telling. It'll be a good test of character for him that he's got a draw that he potentially shouldn't have. But for him to come back from that and see what he's got, because we mentioned Northeast lads there, but like Chris Congo, who were linked with a fight earlier in the week, there'll be names further up that there was talk of, like the likes of Congo, likes of Conor Benn, likes of Josh Kelly. Luther Clay as well, that might now potentially see it as an easier bit of work than what it would. But
Michael Mackinson, again, we always mention Michael Mackinson, again, another sort of bit of an outsider from that division. It's funny, right? And this, honestly, I don't really mean to open a can of worms here, because, like, I don't know, like, it's just shown that he's probably still at that small hall sort of fringe English level. And, like, but these fighters, whether you agree with it or not now, are getting opportunities and work on with Sky and Matchroom. Like, another potential fight with them could be Marco Ryland Charlton, who beat Joe Laws. Again, like, that's a small hall fight, basically, that's ended up on a Matchroom show. And, these fighters are now given the platform, which is great for them. But there's proper fights out there that can be made for him, that don't even necessarily need to be at British level. You can get decent 50-50s from a sort of, like, Ellis Corey would love that, I'm sure, like you mentioned, Darren Surtees. You can get, like, small hall fights on Matchroom shows these days.
From my point of view, fair play, like, well done to Eddie Hearn and Matchroom for that, because especially during these times, those fights aren't going to cost an arm and a leg. And I'm not advocating cost cutting on these big shows, like, you talk about it propping up a Joshua undercard.
Yeah.
To be on a Matchroom show on a Saturday fight night, I wouldn't mind a couple of those fights on, rather than seeing a talented prospect against an opponent that have flown over for the sake of it. Like, those little domestic clashes would provide good fights. If you look at the MTK shows that we've talked about, like, you put even fights on, no matter what level, and they generally produce entertaining results. And
I guess there's no small hall at the minute. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's not include MTK in that, because But like I said last week, there's no Steve Goodwin, there's no York Hall, there's no Phil Jeffries. These lads, if they're going to get the opportunities, then it's going to come further down these cards. So there will be
unless you're prepared to sit in your car for 3 hours watching boxing.
There will be people out there that think, God, look how far Sky's fallen and Matchroom's fallen. But that's a debate for another day. But there's fights out there for Marco going forward. Sam Jones said on Twitter last night that there will be no Stewart rematch, because everyone knows who won, and Marco will just continue his sort of pretend that it didn't happen and just go on and keep going on, really. But I hope that's not the last we see of Stewart. As I think maybe there's an away fighter or someone at the beginning again. He's got a bit of patter about him, good character. So fair play to him last night. Just to quickly round it off from last night, Kez Ashfaq got the night underway on Sky Sports Facebook. Sky Sports
I missed that one.
Facebook has caught a bit. Ashley Lane was pulled out, I think, in the fourth by his corner. He'd been down before by Ashfaq. A lot of people said it was a harsh stoppage. Ashfaq got the win, bounced back from that Mark Leach victory. And that's pretty much that for him. Just to quickly round up, because I know we sometimes go on a bit. Egerton Theophane, Friday night. I watched it. Bit of a beatdown from start to finish. Theophane looked at every bit of his 40-year-old in there. Egerton made particularly easy work of that. The stoppage was pretty inevitable. It came eventually. There was pretty much a beating from start to finish. Good win for Egerton, I guess. Bit of a name on there, even though it's an older name now, a faded name. Bounces back from the Cheeseman defeat with a win. Like you said before, we mentioned that division there, Conway and all that lot. Puts him straight back in. I'm sure he'll get. I don't particularly think his home will be on Channel 5 for the foreseeable. I'm sure he'll get good fights down the line. Egerton, he is what he is. He comes to fight. Decent win for him. So that's that one pretty much wrapped up in a nutshell.
We'll finish up here. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the undercard ones from that Egerton Theophane fight, and it was basically Aaron McKenna and his brother, is it Stephen McKenna, fought on the card, and they're both, apparently, from what I've seen and what I've heard, I've seen little bits of them, two very talented lads. And Aaron in particular made a bit of a statement because he came out and, despite giving away a few pounds, he stopped Jordan Branham, who lost for the first time in over 70 fights by stoppage. So again, journeyman, not an opponent who would have been predicted to pose any problems, but a very tough man, very skilled operator in that level, in that role of going the distance and taking prospects the distance. So for Aaron McKenna to come out and absolutely give a number on him is certainly very impressive, and potentially just generates a little bit of hype of him. And I believe both of them are signed with Golden Boy in America and have obviously boxed over here on the undercard just to help prop it up and get them some exposure, get them fight, essentially keep them active, and just a couple of little prospects for everyone to keep their eye on.
They were both of them on a joint call with interview with Jonathan Lear on the Ringwalk podcast, a podcast that I bang the drum about quite a lot. They were both on this week. They've both been training over in the States with at the Wildcard gym as well. A bit of both have been doing, like, sort of back home and also with, over in the States at the Wildcard with Freddie Roach and that. So two talented prospects, definitely names to keep an eye on. And again, that was the first time I think they'd boxed on a pro card together. So something pretty easy to build there. Do you know what I mean? Getting two brothers, I'm sure they've got good followings in Ireland and in America, so similar to that, like Mick Conlon thing we touched on the podcast with him. And I guess a quick mention to Straightener in the car park on Friday. Bit of an upset there in the main event. Tommy Frank got beat off Guaneros, the tough Mexican. Tommy Frank suffered an injury during the first half of the fight. I think it was like a left shoulder / collarbone type of injury. He was pretty much boxing with one hand there and was sort of correctly, mercifully pulled out by his corner. Bit of a massive upset. Guaneros was a fighter that Sonny Edwards had beat not too long ago. Knowing Sonny like we do, he obviously had his little opinions on Twitter and stuff.
He did, and I'm not going to go all in on Tommy Frank because obviously these things happen. Like, you'd be gutted. It's one of those things that you can't foresee in terms of matchmaking and fights, and potentially could have been a good win for him, a good learning fight. But I think from Sonny Edwards' point of view, I can totally see how he feels justified in dishing out a bit of stick, in that don't now call him out or use his name. And I feel a few domestic fighters around that level have been doing that, like they see Sonny Edwards and they sort of see what he does and how he boxes. He doesn't get many stoppages and they call him out. But Tommy Frank, by all accounts, and we spoke to Sonny a while ago on the podcast, had the opportunity to get that fight made, and they're well within their rights to go another route. They had the Commonwealth title. They didn't want to challenge for the British.
Yeah.
We've seen it with boxers before, where they go down a certain route of a particular sanctioning body. I think it was the IBO in Tommy Frank's case, and looking to build his ranking. And again, that's not a belt that is widely regarded too highly, but it's a route to a world title that could have led to more meaningful fights. But then when you don't take that biggest fight available to you at that time, there's the risk that it then isn't always there. It's not going to be there indefinitely for you. And to look back to what we were talking about at the start, Tommy Frank and Sonny Edwards, comparing that to Joshua Fury, there's not going to be many podcasts do that, but it's the same sort of thing of, yes, as a manager and promoter, you're plotting that route, you're trying to plan longer term, but planning long term in boxing is one of the hardest elements. Like, how do you do that? Like, you're telling the fighters all the time, just don't look ahead, like, don't overlook your opponent, focus on what's in front of you. And yet, everyone in the background is seemingly looking 3 or 4 fights ahead, and it doesn't always work.
It's a funny one. It is. It was an upset, and it was down to the injury. Let's be honest. I'm sure, like, Tommy Frank may well have went on to win that fight with 2 hands and 2 arms. Or, like, it derails him. I don't think it derails him that massively. I'm sure he'll go straight back to that journey, that route he's on with Dennis Hobson, and let's be kind and we'll call it an international route. Do you know what I mean? That we've touched on the pod before, that some fighters do that. Do you know what I mean? They'll sort of divert around any sort of domestic route, and they'll go their own way for the rankings. Probably not the ending they wanted on the straightener in the car park coverage. Just a little mention on that. I enjoyed it when I was watching it. The blaring of the horns got a bit annoying pretty quickly, but it wasn't just always during the action. They did it mostly at the end of fights and stuff. It was something different, like we said. Fair play to them for pulling that off. Something else to watch on a Friday night. Really enjoyed Glenn McCorry on commentary. I think still, I tweeted, but still a pretty good co-commentator is Glenn. So I think that basically concludes the weekend's action. A few wins in the States last night. Nothing that you wouldn't expect. All the big hitters won, really. Well, apart from Korobov and Felix Verdejo. But
weekend of upsets in the States. You unexpected results in that.
Berlanga won, Shakur Stevenson won, Chris Colbert won. I didn't see any of it, to be honest with you. But
yeah, me neither, so I won't go into it in too much detail.
Just
this is where the British boxing blog gets us out of jail. We don't have to concentrate on anything abroad.
And I guess we'll be back later in the week with our preview show. I think one massive fight coming up for a British fighter next weekend. So we'll be back with that later in the week. We'll talk all things Canelo Smith on that.
Sounds good. Pleasure as ever.
Yeah, pleasure as always. Again, thanks to everyone tuning in, listening, subscribing, etc. Keep it up, and we'll keep doing the podcast.
Yeah, if you keep subscribing and listening, we'll keep going. Brilliant.